for long enough to understand what it means. Her name is Aelfgifu of Northumbria. She is 29 years old. She was, until 9 days ago, the wife of a thing whose lands stretched from the river Ouse to the edge of the great forest, a noblewoman whose household included 30 servants, whose marriage portion included gold and silver worth more than most villages produced in a decade, whose children were being educated by monks who came specifically to her hall to teach them Latin and scripture. Her children are dead, her husband is dead, her servants are dead or scattered or taken. Everything she built across 12 years of marriage exists now only in her memory, and even that is fragmenting under the weight of what she has witnessed over the past 9 days. She can smell the smoke that still rises from the burned quarters of the city, can smell the blood that has soaked into the stone floor of this church where the Northmen have gathered their captives, can smell the unwashed bodies of the 43 women who share this space with her noblewomen, merchants' wives, the daughters of craftsmen, anyone the raiders considered valuable enough to keep alive. She can feel the iron collar around her neck, connected by a chain to the collar of the woman beside her, connected in turn to the woman beside her, all of them linked in a line that prevents any individual movement without dragging everyone else along. She can hear the sounds from outside the guttural language of the Northmen as they divide their plunder. The occasional scream that suggests the processing of captives is not yet complete. The rhythmic chanting that she has learned accompanies certain rituals the raiders perform, and she can see, through the broken doorway of the church, the Berserkers. They are not like the other Northmen. The ordinary raiders are brutal enough she has seen what they do, has witnessed things that will never leave her mind, but they operate with a kind of rational cruelty, taking what they want with efficient violence that serves comprehensible purposes. The Berserkers are different. They wear the skins of wolves and bears. They bite their shields and howl before battle. They seem to feel no pain when wounded. And what they do to captives after the fighting ends follows no logic that Aelfgifu can understand. One of them is walking toward the church now. His name, she will later learn, is Sigurd the Red, called that for reasons that have nothing to do with his hair. He has killed 14 men in the taking of York. He has been promised first selection from the noble captives as reward for his service in the assault on the city walls. He is walking toward the church where Aelfgifu is chained, and the other captives are pressing back against the walls, and the silence that replaced the screaming 3 hours ago is about to end. What happens next? What happened to Aelfgifu and to thousands of women like her across 2 centuries of Viking raids on the British Isles is what tonight's video will reveal. This is not the romanticized Vikings of television dramas. This is not the noble warriors of Scandinavian mythology. This is what the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, the Irish annals, and the Scandinavian sagas themselves document about what happened to captive women after the raid's practices so extreme that medieval chroniclers, who were not squeamish about violence, described them in terms suggesting they exceeded anything else in their experience. This is what the Berserkers did. This is what the sources record. This is what you were never taught. What you are about to learn has been systematically romanticized and sanitized in modern depictions of Viking culture. You know about the Vikings as explorers and traders, as the founders of settlements from Greenland to Constantinople, as the ancestors of the Norman conquerors who reshaped medieval Europe. You've seen them depicted in popular culture as complex figures. Violent, certainly, but also brave, honorable in their own way, operating according to a warrior code that commanded respect even from their enemies. But you have never learned what actually happened after the raids. You have never heard about the processing of captives that followed military victory, the systematic evaluation and preparation of enslaved women for transport to Scandinavian markets, the specific practices that berserkers and other elite warriors were permitted as rewards for their service. You have never encountered the sources, both Christian and Scandinavian, that describe these practices in terms that make clear they were not random violence, but structured behavior following established patterns. Tonight you will discover what the medieval sources reveal about the fate of captured noblewomen after Viking raids on Anglo-Saxon England. You will learn about the thrall system that processed captives into merchandise, the specific roles that berserkers played in the selection and treatment of high-value captives. The practices documented in sources ranging from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle to the Icelandic sagas. You will learn about Ælfgifu of Northumbria, who was 29 years old when York fell to the great heathen army and who spent the next 11 months in captivity before her fate was finally determined. About Eadbur of Mercia, who was the daughter of an ealdorman, and who was specifically selected by a berserker chieftain as personal property. About Quenthrith of East Anglia, who attempted to escape during the processing, and discovered what the Northmen did to captives who resisted. About Hild of Lindisfarne, who was captured during the famous raid of 793, and whose story is preserved in monastic records that describe her fate in terms that later copyists tried to suppress. You will learn these things from the sources themselves, from chronicles written by monks who witnessed the raids, from sagas that describe Viking practices from the Scandinavian perspective, from archaeological evidence that confirms what the written sources describe. The Vikings documented what they did because they did not consider it shameful. They wrote about captive-taking and thrall-making as normal aspects of raiding that their descendants should know about and emulate. Subscribe if you want to understand what the Viking Age actually looked like for the people who experienced it as victims rather than as adventurers. Comment below telling me where in the world you are watching from. Because Ælfgifu is crouched in that church in York, and Sigurd the Red is walking toward the door, and I am going to tell you exactly what happened next, what the sources document, what the captives experienced, and what the evidence reveals about practices that shaped the lives of tens of thousands of women across 2 centuries of raiding. But first, I need to explain what berserkers actually were, and why their treatment of captives was different from that of ordinary raiders. The berserkers occupy a unique position in Viking military culture, elite warriors whose battlefield behavior was so extreme that even other Vikings regarded them with a mixture of awe and fear. The word itself comes from the Old Norse, meaning either bear shirt or bare shirt depending on interpretation, and both meanings capture something true about these warriors. They went into battle in altered states of consciousness that the sagas describe as Berserker Gang, the Berserker Fury. In this state, according to sources ranging from Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda to the Ynglinga Saga, they howled like wolves, bit their shields, felt no pain from wounds, and fought with a strength and ferocity that seemed superhuman to observers. They could not distinguish between friend and enemy. They attacked anything that moved. After the fury passed, they often collapsed into exhaustion so complete that they could not move for hours or even days. Modern researchers have proposed various explanations for the Berserker Gang. Some suggest consumption of psychoactive mushrooms, particularly Amanita muscaria, which can produce the dissociative states and pain insensitivity the sources describe. Some suggest extreme psychological conditioning, training from childhood to enter trance states on command. Some suggest genetic or neurological differences that made certain individuals prone to dissociative rage states. The sources themselves attribute the Berserker Gang to possession by animal spirits or favor from Odin, the god of war and death. Whatever the explanation, the behavioral pattern is consistent across sources. Berserkers fought with exceptional violence. They inspired terror in enemies who believed they faced something more than human. And after battles ended, they did not simply return to normal behavior. The sources describe a transition period during which the fury gradually subsided, a period during which berserkers were given access to captives and plunder as both reward and outlet for the aggression that continued after combat. ended. This is the context for understanding what berserkers did to captive women. They were not ordinary raiders whose treatment of captives followed ordinary patterns. They were elite warriors in altered psychological states, granted special privileges by their commanders, operating under different rules than other members of raiding forces. What they did to captives was considered their due payment for services that made Viking military operations successful. The great heathen army that captured York in 867 included a significant berserker contingent. The army was larger and better organized than typical raiding forces, commanded by the sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, equipped for prolonged campaigning rather than quick strikes. The berserkers served as shock troops, the warriors, who led assaults on fortified positions, who broke through defensive lines, who created the chaos that allowed ordinary raiders to complete their work. Sigurd the Red was one of these berserkers. The sources do not record his full biography, but they record enough to establish his status and his reputation. He had served in raids across the North Sea for approximately 12 years. He had survived wounds that should have killed ordinary men. He was known for practices after battles that made even other Vikings uncomfortable. And he had been promised first selection from the noble captives taken at York as reward for his role in breaching the city walls. He was walking toward the church where Ælfgifu was chained, and what was about to happen would follow patterns that the sources document across dozens of similar incidents. The processing of captives after a Viking raid followed established protocols that the sources describe with sufficient consistency to reconstruct the standard sequence. The first stage was sorting. Captives were divided into categories based on their apparent value, nobility, and wealth, indicated by clothing, jewelry, and bearing. Physical condition indicating capacity for labor or other service. Age indicating likely survival during transport, and remaining years of useful life. This sorting happened quickly, usually within hours of a settlement's capture, while the memories of who had been captured, where, and in what condition were still fresh. Ælfgifu was identified as a noblewoman immediately. Her clothing, fine wool dyed with expensive colors, marked her status. Her jewelry, gold rings, silver brooches confirmed it. Her bearing the posture of someone accustomed to giving commands rather than receiving them